There's Julian. You got the link, Julian. Great. Julian's a new member, everybody. There's Susan. Rick, we don't see you. Are you by phone? Rick Weingard? There he is.
There he is.
Hi, everybody.
Hi. Kate Miller. Hello, Kate. Nancy.
Hello.
Hi. Shirley Harrison. Hi. There's Otto. I'm still having a hard time calling you Otto. And you shaved your head.
Back to no hair.
Yeah. So we're going to give a few more minutes because we got close to 100 RSVPs. There's Carol Marcuse. Hi, Carol. Yeah, so we'll just give it a few more minutes. Let's see. Jimmy, are you still letting people in? Jimmy, are you still letting people in? Nod.
Hey, Jimmy can hear you.
I still see two Jimmys.
Do you? I only see one. That's odd,
I
isn't
see
it?
two.
You see two?
Yeah, I see two.
Oh, now I see two. Two Jimmy Thomases there. That's strange. Patrick, hi, Patrick. Okay, so while Jimmy lets people in, I will go ahead. Some of you may not know me because we have quite a few new members. Dory Smith. This is my last meeting as president of Democrats of the Desert. I've been president for 2 years and I'm sad, but have to say there's joy there too and some relief because it keeps you busy, this job. So thanks and kudos to Stephen Jaffe to step up and run for president. But it's also a lot of fun and it's been very rewarding for me. So what we're going to do today is, first of all, I want to let everyone know that Jimmy is recording the meeting. We like to do that so that any members who couldn't join us, we can give them a link and they can see it afterwards. And so we'll do, and we're quickly going to introduce some of the new board. I'm going to let hand it over to Stephen Jaffe, and he's going to introduce the board for 2021 going forward for the next year through February of 2022. And then our guest speaker, wonderful Julie Bornstein, will speak and take questions from the floor. We're actually going to do it a little differently today. We're going to ask you to make your questions brief, but we will let you give a direct question to Julie. And the way we'll do that is you either raise your hand and hopefully me or Jimmy will see you, or put a note in chat that you have a question, and then we can call on you. And we'll try to do it in the order that people let us know they have a question. And then we have a special video to show in honor and recognition of Black History Month. So let's see, we've got 47 participants so far. We had close to 100 signed up. So we know that we lose some folks on the day of, and some folks, if they got their shots, they might not be feeling so great if they got their first or second shot. And I hope you did. So I just want to take a minute before I turn it over to Stephen for introducing the board to say what an honor and a privilege it has been for me to lead this wonderful club for 2 years. And the last year has been especially challenging. And I've had the best boards ever for these 2 years. There's always a little bit of change in the board in February, but the best support, the best boards, creative and generous and willing to keep working hard, even though many of us had some challenges this year during COVID. I'm proud of a lot of things we accomplished over the last 2 things, but I especially want to mention 2. We have to congratulate ourselves and remember that we did a lot of Democrats here in the Valley and Democrats across the country did a heck of a lot, a big job to elect Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. So I'm really proud of that. And we did some special things here in the Valley, including a radio educational campaign for voters, because all voting was by mail in California. And I'm really proud of that. And another thing that I'm very, very proud of is the generosity of this board, because Democrats of the Desert gave almost $3,000 to local nonprofits to help people in our community, students, young adults with children, nurses, and we always gave to nonprofits. Oh, and find food banks, so food to the community. So I'm really, really proud of that. And also, even though we did that, and we also gave a lot of money to local candidates for city council, we're in a very strong financial position to keep DOD going for the next year or more. And as I turn it over to Stephen Jaffe, I'm glad that we're in a sound financial position. So that's enough from me. And I want to turn it over to Stephen so that he can introduce the board for 2021.
Thank you. Am I audible to everybody?
I
Yes.
can hear you.
Okay. First, I'm honored. I'm honored to be taking on the presidency here. I want to start with saying something I've said a few times recently in the past, which is to talk about Dory for a minute. I'm a little trepidatious because the phrase I've been using is Dory is an impossible act to follow. I don't know anybody with the energy and the dedication that she has. And while I will do my very best to try to emulate that, I don't think it's possible to be another Dory Smith. So congratulations and thank you, Dory, for everything you did.
Goldie, sit down.
Everybody, I think knows that. So I'm going to talk a little bit about who I am, because I don't know that I'm known to everybody. I don't particularly like talking about myself, but I know that I should put some biographical data out there. My first memory of working for a Democrat was working in the 1964 senatorial campaign for Senator Phil Hart from Michigan. Phil Hart is the senator. He was beloved by everybody in the Senate. And they named the Hart office building for him. The vote was 99-0 in the Senate, and the missing vote was Senator Hart's because he abstained. So had he voted, it would have been 100-0. I've been involved in Democratic politics pretty much my whole life. The most recent involvements have been, I helped found and was the president of a Democratic club up in Northern California. I ran for the US Congress in 2018. Last year, I ran for the Rancho Mirage City Council, but pretty much got hijacked by the pandemic when it was almost impossible to campaign. I've worked on a lot of causes. I wrote a clean money resolution before I came down here in Northern California and kind of managed it through the San Francisco DCCC. And if you want to know a complicated situation, it's the San Francisco DCCC, if you can imagine. I've worked on Lobby Day in Sacramento for Democrats. I am a strong and continuing advocate of Medicare for all, the real deal, not any of the buzzwords that people use to avoid it, such as universal health care, complete access, and so on. There's only one kind of Medicare for all, and I'm in favor of that. I worked for Bernie Sanders, was recruited by his national campaign, the first one, and did election observations in different states besides California. And I am an animal rights advocate. I have 2 pro bono positions for the American Federation of Aviculture, and I do pro bono legal work for the Animal Legal Defense Fund to intervene where animals may be abused. So that's who I am. If any of you want more information, I'm a lawyer by trade. I've been a lawyer, it'll be 50 years this year. And my primary area of practice is employment law. I represent employees only, people who have had difficulty in the workplace. And I also do a highly specialized kind of whistleblower case called Federal False Claims Act cases. Julie probably knows what that is, but nobody else.
What are you doing? You're all tied up.
Yeah. So that's what I'm doing, and I'm still practicing 50 years out. So I want to introduce the people who are going to be supporting me. First and foremost, even though she's got herself lifted last, is Dory Smith, the President Emeritus, who I will be counting on all kinds of advice and support. The Vice President is currently vacant. That's something that I expect to fill in the foreseeable future. Our treasurer continuing is Megan Stroh-Snyder. She's done a fabulous job, and I expect her to do that. The newly elected executive secretary is Jackie Lopez. I think many of you know Jackie, or you know who she is. We also have a number of committee chairs. They're very important. The new communications chair is Megan Beeman Jacinto. First person I ever met coming to the Coachella Valley. She's also an employment law lawyer, so we have that in common. Continuing as Citizens Lobby Day is Steve Brooks, who I've worked with closely on endorsement committees and some other projects here. Frank Figueroa is the new fundraising chair. Michael Finland is continuing as the candidate development chair, but I've also worked with Michael on the endorsement committee and some other projects that are ongoing right now. There's a continuing hospitality and event chair. Her name is Susan Jaffe. I don't know anything about her, but I heard she did a great job last year. Kathy Snyder is continuing as membership chair. Erin Turan, who also ran for office, she's the new programs chair. She's unable to be here today because Erin's an RN and she hasn't arranged to have Saturdays off yet. And of course, she's got one of the most important jobs a person can have. Continuing as our community outreach chair is Patrick Weiss, somebody I've gotten to know pretty well as well. Great guy. And I also want to recognize Pam Simpkins and Pero Marcuse, who are continuing to manage our voter registration programs and projects. So that's the cast of characters here. And if any of you have any questions or want to have a conversation with me, call me anytime. Call me anytime. I'll make sure my contact information is listed on our website, and I'm easy to find. So that's my introduction. If anybody has any questions, you can ask me in chat and I'll be glad to answer them. So I'm going to spin it back to Dory's closing act here.
Okay, thank you. All right, and everyone, if you're not muted, please mute yourself while Julie speaks. And some of you may know Julie from, she's spoken to DOD numerous times, most recently in 2019 on the issue of homelessness, because she just recently retired as CEO of the Coachella Valley Housing Coalition. And Julie, as Stephen said, is an attorney. She's also been a California Assembly member. And I met her, I think in 2008. Julie helped me and my husband and a group of Democrats in the Valley. The Desert Sun, it was the first year that Obama was running, and the Desert Sun planned a series of counterpoint articles, and then they called them debates, but they weren't true debates, that they filmed and put on their website. And Julie handled one of them beautifully. And I think you debated the infamous Rick Grinnell, right, Julie? Yeah. And if some of you don't know, Rick Grinnell he lives in Palm Springs, and he's the gay Republican that Bush refused to have in his administration because he was gay, even though he had worked on the Bush campaign. And then Trump appointed him ambassador to Germany, where he immediately insulted the Germans. Anyway, so Julie was a real sport. She helped me and my husband, and I think we did 7 or 8 of those counterpoint articles and quote debates. And almost all the Republicans like Rick Grinnell lied during their statements. And that was even before Trump. But anyway, Julie did beautifully, and she's been a great friend ever since. And Julie, add whatever else you'd like to add, but we're so lucky to have her today. We're sad that Dr. Ruiz could not make it after all, but we're hoping he will be with us in March. And I will turn it over to Julie. Everybody.
Dory,
yeah.
I just wanted to say Rick Grinnell is running for governor.
Well, some people think he's going to.
I
Yeah.
think he
He hasn't announced yet.
Yeah, against, yeah. Oh, okay.
That gives them 4 that are, there's now 4 Republicans running.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, let's let Julie, please mute yourself if you're not muted, and let's let Julie have the floor.
Thank you, Dory. And of course, we know why Dr. Ruiz couldn't do this today. They were up very late at night last night, voting the stimulus bill out of the House so that it can now go to the Senate. And even with the 3-hour time limit or time difference, I know when I went to bed, they still hadn't voted last night. So they must have done it in the wee hours of the morning. So I'm sure he will make up for any disappointment next month, because he's really developed a really strong leadership in Congress, particularly on healthcare issues. So I, like you, will look forward to hearing from him next month. But in the meantime, Dory and I talked, and we thought that maybe what would make for an interesting discussion this morning would be to talk about this opening chapter of the Biden-Harris administration. All of you who listen to cable news, and knowing Democratic Club members, I suspect that's 100%, know that even the political pundits have said no president in modern history has come into office facing more and larger crises than Joe Biden has done in taking office on January 20th, including but not limited to an armed insurrection trying to prevent him from being inaugurated. So really, history is already going to make him a historical president. So I thought what I would do is review what's happened. It's been about 40 days, maybe a little less than 40 days since he was inaugurated. But I am just impressed like crazy about how much he's been able to get accomplished so far. And it's not a small task. It's true that both the House and the Senate have Democratic majorities, but they're such slim majorities that he does have to govern in the ways that he promised, which is to seek bipartisan support for his efforts. Now, we know the Republican leadership doesn't want to give him support, so it is a real strong test of all the good relationships he built up with his decades-long service in the Senate, and the fact that he is an empathetic guy who apparently doesn't bear grudges, which is unique, really, in politics, and that he can work across the aisle. So anything that he's able to accomplish should be like an A+, just because of the slim margins in both houses of the Congress. So I thought I would hit certain topics, and then I hope it will encourage questions from you. As a former college and law school teacher, I enjoy the interaction with the people in the discussion. So I'm watching the clock as I speak, and I want to make sure that we leave enough time for questions and dialogue at the end. So of course, President Biden said when he was asked what his first priority was it was getting control of the COVID-19 pandemic. And so let's put that up there, because that's something that's affected everyone's lives and has had a huge impact on our economy. And so what has he done on COVID-19? Well, first was to discover that there was no national plan to roll out the vaccines, which is a shocking surprise. And the fact that the Trump administration refused to participate in any transitional activities until sort of the very end, and even then they were relatively minor. To discover that there was no national plan meant they had to start from scratch, which his folks did. And so now we're seeing the benefit of that. They've already been able to vaccinate more than 50 million people. And if you remember, his goal was to do 100 million by the first 100 days. We're just under 40 days, there's already 50 million. So the administration is definitely on track to exceed the goal that they set for the first 100 days in office. So that's a good thing politically for the administration. And of course, it's a wonderful thing for the country that we now have a vaccination plan that seems to be working. It's certainly working better than it did. There's still room for improvement, but I think the administration realizes that. And so there's a constant effort to make the program go smoother and get vaccinations out to people sooner than thought possible. Now, that has lots of impacts. One is the impact on health and people's anxiety level and the impact on our healthcare system. But one of the other things that has a huge impact is on the economy. And that was a second priority, is that he wanted to get the economy back on track. That too involves a number of things that are dependent on vaccination and getting the disease under control. One is getting the schools open. And if you remember the previous administration, Trump would get to a microphone and say, we have to open the schools, but he never developed a plan or even a guidance to school districts as to how they could do that. And how they could do that is going to cost money. We all know in government that any program has an impact that has a financial consequence. And so if you can't attach the financial resources to carry out a program, the chances of it being successful are slim. So part of what was in last night's bill that passed the House.
Julie, can I pause you there for a second? Julie?
Yeah.
I need to ask everyone to please mute yourself. We can hear some talking in the background. Hello?
It's Judith Rice.
Judith Rice, please mute yourself. Judith Rice, please mute yourself. Judith?
A host has the capability of muting them.
Jimmy, can you please mute Judith Rice?
The weights that we know, and the flaws I'll get back to in a second, because they're so central to
Hello?
this as well. And obviously then the Cold War.
This is so rude.
You get to.
Hello, we need Judith Rice to mute herself. Jimmy, mute her, please.
There we go.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry, Julie, I apologize, but that was
No
very
problem.
distracting. Okay.
Nori and I have talked earlier, and I said I've never been in the entertainment business, but for any of you who are creative and have those contacts, I think there's a great reality show series called Boomers Do Zoom. And I have some of my personal experiences that I can add to that, but I'm sure we all have experiences we can share.
Same here.
So getting back to what's in the stimulus bill that the House passed last night, part of it is aid to school districts and local governments to make sure that schools can reopen and reopen safely. We know it's going to take money because teachers have the right to be vaccinated before they are called back to work. Classes need to be smaller in size. There's additional financial impacts in keeping schools extra clean and perhaps having to buy extra equipment or extra personal protective gear, all kinds of financial impacts. And so that's in the bill as well. So getting the schools open is number one. Number two, of course, is then getting people back to work. And as more of us get vaccinated, we will probably want to get out more, shop more, go to entertainment venues, and get back to our regular jobs at full-time strength. And so several people have suggested, people much smarter on the economy than I, have suggested that once there is a sense of safety in the general environment, that the economy will come roaring back. One article I will refer you to, just simply because I know this fellow and I have such a high opinion of him, is in your news feed the last few days. You may have seen an article by Dr. Raphael Bostic, who is president of the Federal Reserve in Atlanta. But he used to be a professor at USC, and I had the pleasure of officing next to him for a while. And he is a brilliant economist. He served in the Obama administration at Housing and Urban Development, and now he's at the Federal Reserve. And that's his theory as well. So I would refer you to him. He's well worth listening to, and very measured and thoughtful in his thoughts. So first item on the agenda, COVID-19, getting it under control. Second item on the agenda, getting the economy going. Both are being affected by the bill that passed last night, which now goes to the Senate. So I would say, in terms of the top priorities, the administration is well on its way to meeting its goals, or perhaps exceeding its goals. Third element of priority was climate change. So one thing we can mark off is the United States is now back as a member of the Paris Accord. So that, yes, I see Patrick clapping, and that gets us back into the international discussion and puts us back on track. Now, we have 4 years to make up for it, but the good thing about our federalist system is that even if the federal level goes off into a direction that the rest of us don't support, we have state level governments and local governments that can still take action consistent with the climate accord, or even exceeding those goals. So we know that there is a strong movement towards electric vehicles, for example. GM has announced they're going to have an electric fleet. And I'm trying to remember now, I think is it 2035 or is it 2025? But they're bringing out more and more electric vehicles. So we didn't lose as much ground as if no one did anything for the last 4 years, but it's great to be back into the Paris Accord and get us back in partnership with the world on how we address the issues of climate change. And then, of course, there is our standing in the world in general. We know that America's reputation took a huge beating in the last 4 years on almost every level you can think of. We had a leader who acted in such an uncouth manner when meeting with other national leaders that he would be the kind of guy you would never invite back if you had him at your house the first time for dinner. And so that in itself was embarrassing. But then it was discovered that he loved autocrats and really didn't care much for our allies. And so our reputation was really damaged. But now we have somebody who is probably a known commodity to many of the leaders of other nations, allies as well as opponents, who know this fellow. They've dealt with him before. If you remember, one of his committee chairmanships in the Senate was foreign relations. And before he was selected to be Obama's vice president, there was lots of talk about him perhaps being Secretary of State. So he has a reputation and a history with world leaders on the international stage. He not only knows how to act, he also knows who to call and how he can develop common interests that advance American concerns, but doesn't advance us alone. It advances us with allies. This is really brought to bear with what happened just in the last few days. We know that Iranian-supported militias have been attacking Americans and our allies in Syria. And so without any leaks, without any hesitation, without any saber rattling that leads to nothing, he authorized a military attack. It was measured, it was proportional, and it sent a message to the Iranians. At the same time, it didn't foreclose any opportunity to discuss a new nuclear pact with Iran. So he understood all of the competing interests that happen in most situations and looked at a way to make a measured but proportional response. We also know what came out in the last few days has to do with the Saudis and the involvement of the Crown Prince in the murder of Mr. Khashoggi. And so that too is something that will not go without a response. There's been an immediate response. I have a feeling we will be hearing more in the future. So in terms of our position on the world stage, he promised that he would work with our allies. He promised that America would act in its strategic interest, but as a partner in a world so that we do not maximize conflict. We do not sit down with dictators and insult our allies. And he seems to be well on his way to do that as well. But I will tell you the things that I personally appreciate most over this first chapter in the administration has to do with temperament and character. The campaign's theme was restoring the soul of America. And this has probably been the most disruptive time that I can think of. I used to tell my children that I thought 1968 was a terrible year and that we managed to get through that, although it was very, very difficult. But given how difficult 1968 was, I do not remember the enormous danger that we would face from our own citizens. And I don't know how many of you saw last night Anderson Cooper's special on QAnon, but that's enough to give you nightmares for a long time coming. So restoring the soul of America, to me, is probably the biggest challenge. And that's not to undercut any of these other challenges. But it's something that's hard to identify. It's something that's hard to measure. And it is impossible to control. But I think that's personally what I appreciate most is President Biden and the entire administration, Vice President Harris, Doug Emhoff, the second gentleman, Dr. Biden, the First Lady, all of them are involved in showing empathy, setting a high ethical standard, and not rising to the bait. Because what we're finding now is a real need, I think, to restore respect for the law, respect for tradition, respect for history, and respect for the political norms of our democratic society. And to do that requires an enormous amount of personal discipline. It means ignoring insults and sticking with the program. It means not reacting to provocations from political opponents, but sticking with the program. And to me, that aside from the accomplishments in less than 40 days, that is what I admire most about this administration, because they seem to keep their eye on the goal and not be distracted by all the enormous incoming chatter and distraction that is coming from the Republican Party. So with that, that's sort of a recap of how I view the first 40 days. I would be delighted to have your questions and have a little discussion.
Okay, I'm taking names because Patrick asked, Ellie, Maggie, anybody else have a question? Unmute yourself and call out to me. Kevin, you have a question? And what I'm going to do is, anybody else on this screen? Les has a question, and we'll still have some more time. So, okay, so Patrick put his in chat, but I'm gonna ask everybody, when it's your turn to ask your question, to please make it brief so that we get in as many questions as possible. I think that it's important that we try to be interactive with Julie. So keep your questions brief, please. And please mute yourself unless you've been called on. I'm going to mute myself next. And Patrick Weiss gets the first question.
Oh, okay. Hi, Julie.
Hi, Patrick.
My question is, I'm hoping that they'll be able to push towards getting more and more electric cars on the road, or hybrid cars. I think the big issue, the big issue is the cost. And then a lot of people complain that there's not enough charging stations around. And I'm just wondering how the the federal, state, and local governments can make it easier to buy electric cars or hybrid cars, and also to have more charging stations if they can pass some legislation or law to help this along the way. Because right now, you know, a lot of people can't afford the electric car compared to the regular gas car when they look at their budget.
Well, I happen to have an electric car and I've had it for 5.5 years and I am a huge fan. What helped me in the initial cost was a federal and state tax credit. In fact, my accountant told me that was why I got a refund in the year that I bought my car, was because of the federal tax credit. The state of California gives you a check back. So they actually put the money in your pocket. The federal government gives you a credit against your income taxes. But those were helpful. So that's one program that both state and federal government could make sure is robust, is to give you tax incentives or rebates when you buy an electric car. The good news is there are the major companies are now getting involved. And so there will be a more broad selection in terms of price, size, and style. I know when I'm at charging stations, I see lots of Nissan Leafs, I see Chevy Bolts, and so there are other options out there. What I will tell you from my personal experience is the initial cost is in the purchase, but the maintenance makes the car so affordable, it's unbelievable. So just from my personal background, I used to spend about $250 a month on gasoline. Now, of course, I spend $0 on gasoline. My electric bill was hardly affected. So my car is plugged in now. There's a timer on my car, and so it doesn't charge until midnight, and then we'll finish. And so in the pandemic, this has been a real bonus. I don't have to go to gas stations. I get my fuel at night in my garage, and so I don't see anybody in fueling up my car. There's very little maintenance on the car. So, you know, the only thing really are windshield wiper blades and tires. And so the operation of the car is much cheaper than a traditionally gas-fueled automobile. As more and more of us buy it, there will be more charging stations. I've been quite impressed, frankly, in the Coachella Valley of how many charging stations there are out there. So I know the city of Palm Desert has charging stations at City Hall. There are now charging stations at commercial places. Somebody showed me a house for sale yesterday that they were thinking of buying, and one of the selling points was it already had a charging spot in the garage. They're not that hard, not that expensive to install. So we're going to start seeing more and more of them. There are lots of companies that run independent charging stations that are around the state, and you can find those. And I'm not sure about other models. My car would actually charge on a regular 30 volt outlet. It will take a long time, but you could just plug my car into a regular outlet and it will charge up. So as you know, both the fuel and the car kind of have to grow together. There are lots of gas station owners who now realize that as long as they have those little, shop stores or the little convenience marks with their gas station, they will have more customers if they also have electric charging stations in a safe place in the gasoline station. So that way, it doesn't matter whether you use gasoline or whether you use electricity, you can still charge at that station and be a customer in the convenience market. So the marketplace will provide some, I think, but there can be government incentives to make sure that the fueling system matches up with the cars that are being sold to encourage more people to do it. But, you know, now that I've gone electric, I'm never coming back.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Patrick, for the question. Ellie K is next. Unmute yourself, sweetie. Can you unmute yourself?
How's that?
There you go.
Perfect.
Okay. Julie, first of all, thank you again for the writing that you did during the impeachment trial. And it was just excellent every day to read on
Thank you,
Facebook
Ellie.
what
It
you
saved
wrote.
my sanity.
It was outstanding. My question though has to do with the filibuster. There's been much discussion before the election, during the election cycle, and now again, particularly with Mitch McConnell still around. And what are your thoughts? Do you think that the Democrats will be inclined to finally say this has to go, and that they have to, we've got to do something with this because we're not going to get much passed with this current Senate?
Well, my personal view is the filibuster is an anti-democratic parliamentary move to prevent action. So, you know, we like to tell people, even as young as being in the Boy Scouts or the Girl Scouts, the person with the most votes wins. We now know, of course, in real life, that's not always true. But in a legislative setting, you know, the House operates just fine without the filibuster. When you're in the minority and there is no filibuster, the only way you're going to get anything done is to present something that at least some members of the majority can support as well. And I don't see any major problems from that regard. The Senate, being the body, the deliberative body, if you remember Jefferson's metaphor was that that was a saucer where the hot tea of the House could cool off so that they didn't do anything irrational. But the filibuster can bring everything to an absolute halt. And it essentially allows extortion by, at least right now, 10 members of the minority in order for the majority to get something done. So personally, I don't care for the filibuster. I do understand that it is a tool the minority uses, and the leadership of both parties understand that even if they're in the majority today, they might be in the minority tomorrow. And so I think that's one reason it's lasted this long. There is a new book out, and I heard an interview with the author on NPR, and I wish I could remember his name. I think his last name starts with an L, but he was the chief of staff to Harry Reid. And he has written a book about the filibuster. And then in this interview on NPR, I learned an awful lot from him of the history of the filibuster and how it's being used. And it raises some issues I frankly had not thought about, but it did not change my overall opinion. I personally would like to see the filibuster go away. It will change the nature of deliberation in the Senate, but I happen to think it will change it for the better.
I do too. Thank you.
I wanted to make a comment on that. I happen to know or learned recently that Dianne Feinstein is against getting rid of it, because one of our members who writes to a lot of our members of Congress sent her a letter about it, and she responded and said, no, she doesn't want to get rid of it. So what we can do is each personally put pressure on her now. And I would start now if you feel strongly about this. Send her emails, tweet her, call her office, etc. I was shocked when I saw that, and I think it's because she's what I would call old school. Ellie, you wanted to say something? You're muted. Okay. All right, let's move on to the next questioner, Maggie Hamilton.
Yes, that was almost in the same vein as I was going to ask. I was on a Indivisible site up in Marin County, and they're going to do a nationwide push to pressure Manchin, Feinstein, and I forget that other lady, because Democrats, because they're very reluctant to give up the filibuster, but it's really important because of the HR1 bill and having to do with gerrymandering and the census. If you would like to speak a little bit about that, Julie.
Sure. Of course, gerrymandering, and I apologize, I used to teach government at COD, so I understand that in some cases my students haven't thought about this. Gerrymandering, of course, does not affect the Senate because there are no districts, 2 senators from every state. So gerrymandering is a House issue.
Right.
And we've seen even this Supreme Court start to pay a little bit of attention to it. But the precedent from the court cases is that the impact of political partisanship is not a factor that can be used to either approve or deny a drawing of the districts. What the courts have said traditionally is that it is more issues of civil rights, one man, one vote, that will affect the court's review of gerrymandered districts. I will tell you, this is one place where I think I started off on the wrong position, but now I've come to what I believe is the right position. If you remember, in California in 2010, there was a ballot initiative that took away the right to draw districts from the legislature and give it to a bipartisan, actually tripartisan citizens committee. I was opposed to it at the time. The Democratic Party was opposed to it at the time. One reason why is the system was working just fine for us. We've been dominating the legislature for decades. But there had been difficulties in the past. The citizens, which I now see I was wrong, in their wisdom, approved the initiative. And so now our districts in California are drawn by not politicians, but members of a commission and political scientists with data and analytics to make sure that the districts are more fair. I think that's a growing trend, and I think a number of states will start to adopt that. It is certainly something that will never come from the elected officials, but will come from the citizens themselves, if they are disappointed or disgusted or turned off by the partisanship in drawing districts. But we know what's happening. There are many states where if you look at the partisan makeup of the state, and I'm just going to make something up for an example. Let's say you pick a state, and in the voter registration, Republicans have 54% of registered voters. I'm going to do away with independents. So they have 54%, and the Democrats have 46%. But the state legislature is 80% Republican. So that skews incorrectly, I think, in my view, the partisan representation in their state legislature. But because the Republicans are in the majority, they draw the districts so that they can win more representative seats than their registration in the overall state would justify. Now, the courts in the past haven't used those kinds of outcomes to throw out those kinds of gerrymandered districts. And they look instead to make sure that there are no communities of color or disadvantaged communities that are lacking representation through the drawing of the districts. But if they advantage on a partisan basis the party in control through the districts, they are allowing them. So it is going to be a fight. I would think as a party, now that we have California the way it is, this would not be a bad thing for us to bring up to the DNC and try to have a national effort to take gerrymandering and the drawing of districts. So we're talking congressional districts, state legislative districts, school districts, county supervisor districts. Take that away from the political process in the state legislature and give it to a citizens committee, whether they want to use California as a model or not. But, you know, we have equal number of Democrats, Republicans, and either declined a state or other parties on our commission to make sure how it turns out. And of course, as it turns out, now that we're 10 years past that, it's been a real boon in California to Democrats, because we've done a good job, and many of it is you have all done a good job of registering people. And so if you draw the districts now under the set of agreed upon criteria of community of interest, making sure that no minority community is disadvantaged, look at how many Democrats we've been able to elect, because there are just more registered Democrats by a lot than there are Republicans in California. So from a purely partisan viewpoint, it's turned out to be very good for us. But I think, you know, if we say that we want to be fair, we have to be able to bite the bullet. And that means take it away from the partisan legislatures, even if they happen to be our majority. Does that help answer the question, Maggie? There was a second part. Did I get to that?
Well, it was HR1. they're concerned with the census too. California might lose the seat, and Texas and North Carolina may gain, and so we may lose our Democratic minuscule majority in the 2022 election.
Well, yeah, the census was, of course, under attack by the administration in this last round. And then you add the pandemic, so that the traditional outreach efforts to get everybody included in the census were very difficult. And so we know the results even are already delayed. We can't change that at this point unless Congress and the courts agree that they can do a makeup census, but I don't see how they're going to do that. So even before the pandemic, California's growth had slowed considerably. Places like Texas were growing faster than we were. So there was a concern we were going to lose a seat even without the pandemic and even without some of the games played in the census. And it depends on what the Citizens Commission does. It's also possible it could be a Republican seat that we lose. And that if we go from 53 to 52, there's even a chance that it might currently be a seat that was held by the Republicans, which wouldn't affect our majority in the House to that extent. But it does mean that we're going to play by the rules. We've got to watch and see what these outcomes are, and then be ready to identify House seats that we can flip to maintain our majority.
Thank you. Next, Kevin Turman is next.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Julie, for spending some time with us. Winning the presidency via the Electoral College majority while losing the popular vote was an anomaly with Bush v. Gore and an anomaly even Trump-Clinton. But now it seems to be the strategy. This Stop the Steal drive was never about whether he had the majority of votes, only whether he had particular votes in particular states. So my question is, what can be done about the way the Electoral College flies in the face of popular vote, and what is being done?
Well, in my personal view, the Electoral College is an archaic construction as part of the Great Compromise back in 1787 to get the small states and the large states to agree to be part of a unified government. And what might have worked then is no longer relevant. In those days, of course, so many people lived in rural areas. There were only a handful of states. It was a much different situation than what we have now. But I would agree with you. I think that is the strategy of the Republican Party, because they know that they can't win the popular vote. I mean, they won 2 presidencies by losing the popular vote just in this decade. And I mean, this millennium, and we're in this century, and we're only at the 21st year of the century. So this is an issue that all Democrats should be well aware of. Now, the difficulty is the Electoral College is set up in the Constitution. So the only way to change it is by amending the Constitution. And the Republicans are going to fight like crazy to keep from doing that. And of course, the process to amend, there are 2 processes to amend the Constitution, but we've only ever used one of them. And that's the one where it gets passed by Congress and then has to be ratified by 3/4 of the states. Well, you can't get 3/4 of the states run by Democrats. So there will be Republican states that would have to ratify this in their state legislatures in order to amend the Constitution. And so I sadly don't think that we're going to see that happen. It's just almost an insurmountable obstacle. The fastest ratification of an amendment to the Constitution was the one giving 18-year-olds the vote. And you might remember that was during the Vietnam War. We were drafting people at age of 19, but they weren't being allowed to vote until they were 21. And so there was a bipartisan, strong consensus nationally that just was inequitable. And so that amendment got introduced and passed in Congress and ratified by 3/4 of the states in a matter of months. But most amendments take a very long time, and this one in particular, that would bring huge advantages to Democrats and large states with large urban populations. I don't see how that's going to happen, sadly.
Okay, well, thank you.
Well,
Now,
and-
let me add one thing that as a point of optimism. I hate to leave everybody on a downer.
Well, it is
with
what
that
it
question.
is.
So the one point of optimism, of course, is that we have to have the same strategy.
yes.
So the Republican strategy is identify what states they can win to win an electoral college majority and focus our efforts on those states. And I think the Biden-Harris campaign did a pretty good job of that. So that even though in some of those states it was a small margin, they did focus on states that would give him an electoral college majority. And I think that's a strategy that we have to pursue in the future. Not every vote is equal to every other vote. So, you know, they won't spend a lot of time maybe campaigning in California as a Democrat. They'll spend more times in those states that would determine the outcome of the electoral college. But if those are the rules of the game, that's the way we're going to have to play it.
Okay. All right. Steve, I know you want to have a question, but I've got a couple of people in front of you. Okay.
I only wanted to direct people to look at the chat because I wanted them to see the stuff about the interstate compact for the electoral college, because that's another solution. So take a look in the chat. Thanks.
Okay. Oh, thank you for that. Okay. So next questioner was Dr. Les Zendel. Les,
Thank
you're
you.
on.
Thanks. Hi, Julie.
Hi, Les.
I wonder if you could comment on something that I'm sort of feeling increasingly concerned about, and that's the future cohesion of the Democratic Party. You know, we were able to win the election 3 months ago because the Democrats were united against Trump, and we won the White House. We barely eked out a win in the Senate and lost seats in the House. And I'm as I look at the Democratic Party now, I do see some factionalism and some disagreements that have been sort of swept under the surface. And I'm wondering how we can keep a wide tent, but not allow the different factions to fight each other and to hand victory to the Republicans.
I too am concerned about that, Les, and that's been a problem that's been with us for some time. And I like to say that now that I'm in my elderly years, and certainly this pandemic keeps labeling me as elderly, that I am adopting the persona of a crotchety grandma. So I am in many cases feel like verbally I'm doing this to younger people. So I'm going to try not to do this to younger people, but every once in a while it comes off that way. So part of this has to do, though, with the character and the personal values that the Biden-Harris campaign brings. And this is what I mean by that. We shouldn't demonize people who disagree with us. We know that that's happening between the supporters of Trump versus the rest of the world. And that's a dangerous and certainly anti-democratic approach. But in my experience, and you know, I've held office as a Democrat in a partisan environment. In my experience, we Democrats do that too. We tend to demonize people who disagree with us. And we forget to focus on the things we have in common. What we have in common is we all support and maybe not 100%, there may be things in our platform I don't support, but I understand that what I do want to see happen with the direction of our country, our state, our county, is consistent with the values of the Democratic Party. So I would hope that we would understand that if people identify as Democrats, it's because they support the values and the majority of the policies of the Democratic Party and the way we prioritize issues. And that to me is one of the bankruptcies of the Republican Party right now, is they don't even have a platform. Their only cohesion is you're either with Trump or you're against Trump, and we're watching their fighting. But we don't want to fall prey to that either. And so we are a big tent party. To me, that's one of the attractions of being a Democrat. But that means we will have various points of view on how to address issues. And so one of the things that I think we need to keep in mind before we get mad at fellow Democrats for not seeing the world the way we see the world is that as long as we're addressing an issue and we see an issue as a priority, we should not allow ourselves to pull ourselves apart because we might disagree on the method to address the issue. Because in a big tent party, you're going to have lots of people disagree with the method in which to address the issue. So that's one thing. The other is to not demonize people just because they don't agree with you. They're Democrats. They're public servants. And it's not easy being a public servant. They are devoting their lives to solving problems, which is, to me, the biggest appeal of being a public servant, is addressing problems and how to solve them. But we should not then say something terrible about their character or work to defeat them the next time around because they disagreed with us on 1, 2, 3, or 4 issues. They might be voting on 35 issues, but you might disagree with them on 1, 2, 3, or 4 of them. And so that's something that I've observed. I come out of the affordable housing industry, and one of the things I try to caution my colleagues is say, because they build housing for low-income people, they feel a sense of superiority to people who build housing for money. And they forget sometimes we have some very common issues. And most of the people who build housing for money are Republicans, and most of the people who build housing for low-income people are Democrats. But if there's an issue that would make both of our lives better because we all build housing, why shouldn't we work together on that issue? Why would we assume that those people are bad guys because they build housing for money and we build housing to make the community a better place? That demonization of people who disagree with us, to me, is the fundamental danger that we run into. What I look for in the leadership of the party is someone who can help to balance those issues and find a way for people with different points of view of how to do something to see common ground. Because the nature of a legislature, whether it's Congress or a state legislature, has got to be compromised. No one person can get their idea passed. You have to have a majority of votes, or sadly in the Senate with a filibuster, a super majority of votes, but you have to have the votes to get it passed. And everybody has a different district they represent or a different state they represent. They may have different life experiences that bring value to the discussion, but they might not want to do exactly what you want to do. And compromise is not a bad word. That's how we get things done in legislative democracies. And so that would be my biggest caution, is try to not demonize somebody within our party because they disagree with the method to address a public issue. The last thing I'll say, because it harkens back to the question on gerrymandering, what I found in my political experience is people who come from safe districts, their only experience has been fighting people in their own party. And those of you who come from San Francisco, you probably have experience with this. You don't necessarily fight the other party. You're only fighting the people in your own party. So one of the things that we enjoy in Riverside County is we are still not a safe democratic area. And so we know we have to present proposals that will be appealing to people who might be independents, decline to states, and maybe even a few Republicans that would see it our way. And so we don't tend to fight our own in those places where a seat can flip from Democrat to Republican, depending on the election cycle.
Patrick, hold on. I've got one more question. I'll put you on the list again. Yeah, we probably got time for 3 more questions. I'm not sure if we're going to be able to show the Maya Angelou video today because Jimmy's been having some technical issues, but let's get to Chris with Democrats of Hemet is on the line, and he has a question for Julie. Chris?
Yes, hi. Thank you for presenting today, Julie. Before I ask my question, I'd like to draw everyone's attention to my link in the chat box. I am trying to develop a petition to request a legislative meeting with Raul Ruiz. So if you wouldn't mind going to that and signing on, I'd appreciate it. Julie, my question.
Can I interrupt you for a second, Chris?
Yes.
You and Steve Brooks need to talk because Steve is Democrats of the Desert Citizens Lobbying Day. And that's what he does, is gets groups together to lobby Ruiz and others. So at some point, you two connect, okay?
We have.
Steve Brooks. Okay, you have. Okay. All right, go ahead with your question for Julie. Sorry.
Thank you. Julie, you mentioned that you were a college teacher at community college level, and I believe you mentioned USD.
Not USD. I taught at COD, College of the Desert here in Palm Desert.
I see.
Taught government there, and then I've taught in a couple of law schools.
I see. Well, my question concerns this tuition forgiveness that is being proposed. And I'm wondering if you have any insight into whether that's going to be applied just to public educational institutions or if that's going to include private institutions, and what you might think about the fairness of applying forgiveness to both cases.
Well, of course, again, that's a proposal that will go through a legislature. So, and I don't even have one vote, aside from not having a majority. So it will come out with certain provisions. And then the challenge for all of us is, are there provisions that we would want to lobby our elected officials to oppose and try to have removed from the bill? Are there provisions that have not been in the bill that ought to be in the bill? And then hope that those get in there. But again, and this harkens back to Les's question, even if the end of the bill isn't everything we want, but it's still an advancement, it forgives a significant amount of debt to make it worthwhile, we probably want to support it. Now, in terms of whether public or private, the debt belongs to the student. And so in my mind, it doesn't matter whether it's a public or private institution. If the student has incurred debt in order to secure an education, then I think it shouldn't matter which educational institution it is. Where I would rather see a provision in the bill is maybe cap the amount of debt, so that a student who says, well, I don't want to incur a lot of debt, so I'm going to go to a public university, and another student says, well, I don't care, I'm going to go to this private institution because the government's going to forgive a large part of my debt, you know, or an unlimited amount of my debt, I could see where that doesn't seem to make much sense. I'm a public university graduate, although my law school was a private university. I got through the public university without any debt at all, but that's because I'm old and things were really cheap in those days. But at the private institution, I ended up with debt. It wasn't my preference to go there, but I ended up in law school at a private institution. So it's hard to come out with a single phrase in a bill that's going to treat everybody equitably, because in my case, I didn't want to go to the private school. I didn't pick it to luxuriate or have a better football game or whatever those things. It's just the way it happened to work out. So I can see capping the amount of debt that would be forgiven, and then making exceptions for people who go into professions that society needs that may not be particularly high paid. You know, I'm a lawyer. I don't see where you would give me the same kind of debt relief that you might give somebody who becomes an elementary school teacher or runs a medical clinic in low-income communities. I could see where you might want to do that, and there's some precedent for that. When I was in school, if teachers could get their debt forgiven if they taught in an inner city school. So we have done that before in terms of public policy. Right now in California, for most students, they can go to a community college without incurring debt. There's fee waivers, there's free tuition in most of the districts. And so that helps bring the debt down also. So, you know, the devil is always in the details. We as Democrats may all believe in debt forgiveness for student loan, but the question comes down with, as you point out, what kind of institution, what is the profession of the person involved, and you know, what other options do they pursue? Is it public or private? That's where the compromise is often required.
Thank you.
Sure.
Okay, Patrick had another question. Patrick, unmute yourself.
Oh, my question is, and it's a contentious issue within the California Democratic Party at times, and that is the Israel-Palestine situation, where there's a faction of the Democratic Party that doesn't seem to want to keep the two-state solution, and they want to do a one-state solution. And so they've been trying to change the language of the California Democratic Party platform on the two-state solution, and they have failed at it last year. And I was in 2019, they failed at that. So with this issue continuing to kind of tear some of us apart in the Democratic Party, how do we come together on this, and how do we deal with a faction of the party that's kind of like my way or the highway, and they're pretty much, and they're not going to change? What can you say to that?
Well, one is I'm going to refer to my answer to Les. I mean, that's something that will tear a party apart. If somebody comes in and says it's my way or the highway. I mean, we know we want peace in the Middle East. That's the overall goal that I think all Democrats can get behind. The question is, how do you achieve that? Right up front, because I like to tell my students, nobody is without bias. And I like to disclose mine. I've been a Zionist all my life, still a Zionist, and certainly want to see a strong and strategically defensible Israel. That being said, I have represented Palestinians. My son's best friend is a Palestinian since first grade. And I want to see a viable, defensible state for Palestinians as well. So I'm a big believer in the two-state solution. Now, if there are members of the Democratic Party that say it's my way or the highway, and I'm perfectly willing to tear this party apart because I think you're evil because you don't support my point of view, then we're no different than what's going on in the Republican Party right now. And that's a sure way for defeat. So being also a strong and loyal Democrat, I would take the political route. If these are a group of people who say it's my way or the highway, and I'm perfectly willing to damage the party to get my way, then, they probably had to be elected to be a delegate. I would work with the people in their community to run people against them so that they don't win the next election. I mean, we are a political party. So one of the ways to handle things is a political solution. And, we're all asked to vote for delegates every 2 years. And our elected officials appoint delegates. So one of the things we can do is make sure that when we vote for a delegate, we understand what their position is on this part of the party platform, and not vote for people who are my way or the highway kind of people. And ask our elected officials, which I don't know the current slate of folks representing Riverside County, but I would be surprised if our elected officials have appointed people who take that approach. And they can unappoint them. They don't have to wait till the next election. If one of their delegates is taking position.
Oops, you got muted somehow.
Sorry. If one of our elected officials takes a position that their delegate refuses to support, they can just unappoint them and appoint somebody else.
What this sort of reminds me of is what happened with some of the Bernie-crats, right? Some of them were like, Bernie or nothing, and maybe they changed parties. I hope they've calmed down. And I don't mean to insult anyone, but, now Bernie's going to have quite a bit of influence going forward in the Senate. So that's all good.
Well, and I mean, he has an important voice in the party, but he understands that if he can't persuade a majority of people to go with him, then he's done his best. He's explained his point of view, and now he's got to find a way to support what the majority want to do.
Right. And that's what he's doing.
Exactly.
Okay. One more question before Julie signs off, and then we've got a couple of more pieces of business. Any other questions? Okay, and Maggie Hamilton on the student debt mentioned that one of the problems is the high interest rate. So that might be another way to help students is ensure that they get
Well,
low
you're right,
interest.
Maggie, and the whole student loan program needs to be reformed because much of it has been given to the private sector who are in this to make money. And so often you could borrow at a much lower rate by, your parents taking out a loan on the house, or taking out an unsecured loan than what students are required to pay in a bank just because they're going to a student loan program. So there's lots of room for reform in the student loan system.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Julie. Thank you very, very much for being with us.
It's my
today.
pleasure. It's always nice to see you all.
Covered a lot of issues. Thank you. Thank you. So Ellie Kay, who is the political director and started the Democratic headquarters of the Desert, asked for a few minutes. She's announcing something. Ellie?
Thank you. Thank you, Dory. Yeah, some of you who get Facebook or get my Facebook have already are aware of what I'm going to say, but based on some requests from some very, very nice people that I have a lot of respect for, I'm running now as candidate for Region 19 Director. For those of you who know, Michael Milan has been our Region 19 Director. Michael has decided not to run again. And so I was asked to do so, and I've agreed to do so. And I'm going to be asking for those of you who are delegates, I'm going to ask for your support and your vote as we get to the convention in April. And if you have any questions for me, anything you want to talk about, please feel free to give me a call at home. Or you can also, of course, you can email me, you can text me, you can send up a smoke. No, don't send up a smoke signal. We gotta be careful right now with smoke. But anyway, I will appreciate very much to have your support. And yeah, I'm looking forward to being the next Region 19 Director. Thank you, Dory, for the time.
Oh, you're welcome. And did you explain that that person is an important liaison between the club presidents and
Well,
RC?
yeah, that's exactly what it is. I'm going to be handling 4 ADEM districts, 4 areas, AD 71, 60, well, obviously 56, 42, which is ours and are many of ours. And one more, which I believe is 68. I'm not sure. I've got to double check on that. My thought is that because it's a lot of traveling and I won't be able to do that because I'm like all of you respecting the COVID virus very much, I will be setting up Zoom meetings because I think it's important, particularly at this time in the Democratic Party and in this whole thing that we're all going through right now, to stay in contact. Michael works, and so he hasn't been able to stay as in contact with folks as much as I plan to. I'm a retired person, so I'm going to be able to have Zoom meetings with you folks. I will be in not constant, obviously, but I'll be in very close contact with the club presidents for all of our clubs throughout Riverside County and through parts of San Bernardino even. It's a big district, but I look forward to staying in contact with everyone, hearing your concerns, and keeping in contact with the California Democratic Party to let them know what your concerns are. So again, I ask for your support. And if you have any questions for me, any suggestions, please give a call. I appreciate it. And yes, I will remain with the Democratic headquarters of the Desert. I'm not going anywhere with it. I'm not leaving there ever.
Yeah.
So I do thank you again for the time. And Julie, as always, you were terrific.
Yeah, I think she signed off already, but I will tell her.
Oh, okay.
so knowledgeable. So we were going to play the Maya Angelou reading her poem at Bill Clinton's first inauguration, but unfortunately Jimmy is having technical problems. Now, do we have any whiz kids on the line who has the share screen that could go find the YouTube video of that real quickly? I don't know how to do it, so I apologize. What we'll try to do is show it next month. And so sorry about that. Things happen. So the only last thing I want to say is that I hope that all of you have reached out and tried to find a way, have either gotten your vaccines or know how you're going to get them. Things are getting better. I just saw in the Desert Sun today that California expects 1 million of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine within 3 weeks, and it was just approved. I have an 80-year-old friend who is afraid of needles, so she's been waiting for that vaccine, and I keep telling her, just take one, just take any shot, but she is determined to have the J&J shot, so I was thrilled to see that's going to happen soon. If you ever need resources, contact us, please. We know people throughout the community. We've got a bunch of new board members who know people throughout even wider swath of the community than we had before, including the East Valley. So it's all exciting, and stay well out there. And I look forward to seeing you next month when I'm just a little watcher and not a leader next month. Stephen, you want to say anything?
Thank you, Dory, again.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you, Dory.
It's been my pleasure. Stephen, any wind-up comments?
Nothing in particular. I'm looking forward to taking the helm with your assistance and that of the board and the other chairs. And I'm pretty sure 2021 is going to be a better year than 2020. Again, you navigated through very stormy waters, Ms. Smith. So
with a lot of help and a lot of
yes,
support.
so we're all very grateful for that.
And I hope that we all prepare to fight hard in 2022 when the Republicans think that they're going to win the House and the Senate back.
Yes.
So I'm going to stay involved.
We continue to live in very interesting times.
Yes.
So do you want to make a farewell speech?
No, I sort of said it at the beginning. It's been my pleasure. And I hope to see your smiling faces at Date Palm Country Club in a few months.
All right.
I'll be there. Okay.
All right. Thank
All
you,
right.
Dory.
Dory, I did find it. I did find it.
Oh, you found the Maya Angelou?
Yeah, I think I've got
You
it
know how to
here.
share it? For those who want to stay, it's really moving. You know, she was a beautiful writer and poet, and this was at Clinton's inauguration.
Okay, the Clinton one is the one you're talking
Yeah.
about.
Yeah.
Okay, that is, yeah, that's why I was having trouble, because you said Obama, but you meant Clinton.
Oh,
then.
did I? Okay, that's the senior citizen brain.
Let me see if I can share it for. Let's see.
Okay, we're hanging with a bated breath.
Yay.
Don't
think I'm muted.
Where's the start button?
There was an arrow on the screen. I've never done it myself.
I thought that was the poem. It must be a picture, but let me see. Let me look. Let me stop for a second here.
Okay. It's in YouTube, and so
Maybe
hopefully
touch a screen in the middle, touch the screen.
Oh, I did do that, but
he thinks that was just a photo.
it looks like it is on YouTube, but I was there before, but I kept looking for Obama. So
Oh, I'm sorry. All right, well, we'll just sign off. We'll show it to everybody next month. Thank you so much.
Ready?
Stay well. Stay well. Get those shots. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you, Dory.
You're welcome. Bye.